Okay, I'm having a wonderful chat with violinist Larissa Elisha and cellist Stephen Elisha. Not uncoincidentally, they are quite close together and they are married, so we're okay. They are Duo Virtuoso. You guys are in Georgia, state of Georgia, at Georgia Southern University. Faculty there will get into all of that, but we are discussing your 2017 MSR Classics release, Duo Virtuoso II, and you do have a Duo Virtuoso, the first volume. It's a classic, more classic period repertoire, as I
Yes,
recall, more or less,
we
with one exception.
yes we recorded for MSR Classics Duo Virtuoso a few years back, and it was such a popular CD that they actually sold out, and they had to re-release that album. And after that happened,
That's something.
the producer said to us, how about doing another uh,
See if we
Duo
can see.
Virtuoso too? And we had recorded more traditional repertoire in the first CD, more of a um, taster's choice, you might say. We did some Boccherini, Mozart,
Mozart.
Beethoven, and the gem cornerstone of that album was the Kodai uh,
Which in
duo.
a kind of sort of way might have been a sort of psychological preamble to Volume 2, if you kind of get my drift. Is there anything to that?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the work that everybody uh, rose to, and that sort of showed the way. And all composers after Kodai realized, wow, we could do that too.
And that's what influenced actually Ravel.
Well,
And
yes,
what else will we have in our second CD? So
and
that makes
here are the three glorious works on this CD. Arthur Honegger, Sonatina for violin and cello from 1932. We may have discussed, or I hope I'll mention now, but this is music from between the wars, First World War and Second World War. Maurice Ravel, the Sonata for violin and cello from 1920-22. That's interesting. I'm talking about trauma and the period of time to create a work. We'll discuss that. And then Erwin Schulhoff's Duo for violin and cello from 1925. Such a loss of such great talent. He was murdered in the concentration camps in 1942. But this is from 1925. But remember, he has survived the First World War also. And all of these men were born in the late 19th century, 1875, 1890s, died, I think, mostly in the, 30s, except for Honegger, who lived to 1955. But these three works are really, really fascinating. So I salute you for making this choice. Very, very interesting, very apropos, very much linked somehow. These three composers linked together. Ravel, in particular, will spend some time on because it's stunning. But I think I may have forgotten to introduce you properly. Let me just pull down my goodie here a little bit. Violinist Larissa Elisha. We've been working on the last name, everybody, in case you think I'm having a problem, which I am. Bachelor of Music and Masters from the State Academy of Music in Belarus. Stop me if I get in trouble here with credits and such. And doctorate from the Lipinski Academy of Music. Is that also in Belarus, in Minsk, or?
well, that is Wroclaw, or old name for the city was Breslau. Yeah, that used to be a German city,
Yeah.
but Wroclaw is Poland now. That is
Aha. Okay. And now you are a violin, viola, chamber music professor and director of upper strings studies at Georgia Southern University. You're Russian American. I want to ask you about when you came to this country and received your citizenship. And of course, you've had a huge career in Europe and all over the place. Stephen, cellist. Stephen Elisha, Bachelor of Music and Performance from Indiana University. Now this begins to tell me something, I don't know what, but something about direction and intellect. Get ready up for this compliment. A Bachelor of Music and Performance from Indiana University School of Music, studying with James Starker. Wow. Masters from Yale. Now, every Yalie that I have known in my entire life has been, in spite of themselves, super intellectual. Okay, so I'm just assuming that that your mind works in a Yale sort of way, and your doctorate from the University of Kansas. Currently head of strings area for and director of orchestras and conductor of the Georgia Southern University Symphony. Have I got it right? And you're
Yes.
associate professor of music at Georgia Southern University.
Actually, now I am full professor.
Full professor. Thank you very much. Let me just do that right now. I'm officially accepting your promotion, full professor of music at Georgia Southern University, and it's the conducting thing. I'm a conductor, or was. I'm now too old, I guess, and I'm curious because when there's a bug, it's called conducting, and it's usually fascinating to figure out when it struck. That'll be interesting, I think. Let's see. Let's just do.
And let me
Yeah.
just a slight correction on the
Sure.
pronunciation of my mentor, Janos Stark.
Janos, yes. See, something's crazy. Of course, I should know it was Janos. Thank you for correcting me on that. I thought, what did I say, James?
James. But
I'm convinced it's the.
Janos is actually Hungarian for John.
So
So
I've read something unconsciously today. Even I have known of Janos Starker since I was a kid, and I called him James. Forgive me, Janos, wherever you are. And moreover, I'm convinced it's the isolation.
well, if you had another cellist by the name of Matthew, then you'd have John, James, and Matthew.
Anyway, thanks for correcting me on that because as I spoke, I thought James Starker doesn't sound quite right. Thank you. But major, major world famous cellist, fabulous. Uh, let's see, where were we here before I got all messed up? Let how
That
about a
was
little? Yeah,
Aldo Pariso was my teacher at Yale.
yeah. Thank you.
And since we're talking about mentors, probably that would be fair for me to mention that I had a great opportunity to study with student of David Oistrakh, and her name of
Oh, I
all
saw
was
that.
Honenko, and I studied with her throughout my undergraduate and graduate, which was an excellent opportunity. So,
Sure. Okay, we got
and
that all squared away. Wonderful. Yeah. Any more? Any more? I'm eager. I'm ready.
Well, here's a common thread. Larissa was not just a student of, but also Olga Popomenko's assistant. And
working with her students, basically, she was trusting me with her class. So that was fantastic learning experience for me.
and in the same capacity, when I was at Yale, I was Aldo Pariso's teaching assistant, and I was teaching the undergrads from Yale.
What a nightmare. Being a TA and teaching undergrads, but nevertheless. No,
For some, maybe, but for me, it was always a
that's
joy.
right. And also a great learning experience. So I was being a little bit
Absolutely.
facetious there. How about
And
yeah,
in my case, I think that I was so lucky to hear stories that she would share with me that David Oistrakh would tell her. And David Oistrakh was close friend with Shostakovich, with Prokofiev. And by playing certain pieces and giving and getting such direct comment and sharing information that definitely was not just not available, but was even prohibited.
ooh,
So that was really very special insight in certain works.
which is a gorgeous segue to a little bit of backstory. Please tell me what was life in Belarus as a child? When did you decide to come or were offered an opportunity to come to American Son? Let's have that story.
To be honest, luckily I was not born in Belarus.
Ah, you were
I
born
was
in.
I was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, by Caspian Sea. Actually, Rostropovich was born there. Bela Davidovich was born there. It was beautiful kind of oasis of musical souls, I guess.
Mm,
So I lived there and I studied in a special music school for gifted. And the only reason I left that place because I lost my teacher. He just passed away, and I transferred to same type of school to Minsk, Belarus, and to another teacher who was absolutely phenomenal.
Well, thank you for clarifying so much because Russia is still kind of a mystery to all of us in that it once upon a time was the Soviet Union of Soviet socialist states, many, many countries. So thank you for helping to clarify that. I think most of Westerners, we are now a bit clearer about Belarus, about Ukraine, some of the eastern fringe of the former empire, but that was fascinating. So it sounds even as though your youth might have been a little bit away from, what shall I say, from the hugeness of Minsk? Or is there a large city that you grew up in?
is a large city, but Baku, where I grew up, like that's a several million population. Very huge city also, it's just very different culture. It was very international kind of setting, very musical and warm. Imagine that you never see snow, but you see very wonderful people, lots of flowers, and lots of music and cultural exchanges.
And not to waste our interview too much longer, but I need to kind of satisfy my own mind and memory a little bit. Baku, I'm remembering now modern buildings. It is a big capital city, and but is that a kind of, I don't want to use an incorrect word, but a sort of Mongolian or Uyghur or something type of people
No,
that live in that country?
that is Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, but because that is so much international, as I mentioned, that is very much of a mix of
I
everybody.
see. Okay.
And that was teaching kind of our culture a lot because you're learning about other cultures, many different languages and all that exchanges. That was great.
Wonderful.
Belarus, of course, in Belarus, I was studying. That was a place where I learned, and I had opportunity to study with great teacher. And later on, I was invited to teach and perform in Poland. And after I moved there and I started my work at the Academy of Music, I was asked to play audition for the concertmaster of State Philharmonic Orchestra, and actually I got the position. So I held two full-time positions, and plus I performed a lot solo, and I performed with chamber orchestra Leopoldino, and that was pretty busy, but it was very wonderful, exciting moment.
So when did you decide to immigrate
Um, Immigrate where?
to the U.S.? Because I have read
My
again, I hope not incorrectly, that you are Russian American. So I presume you have an American citizenship.
that is true. My family was here for a very long time. Yeah,
Ah,
I'm still working in Poland, and I enjoyed my career in Poland. And I got invitation to come for 1 year to work with students in Wisconsin Conservative in University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And after I came and I started teaching at Wisconsin Conservatory of Music, and I agreed, of course, because my family was living in Milwaukee.
sure.
So after 1 year later on, I decided to stay another year. And it was interesting that my job in Poland, they kept my job for me for 2 years. So, and they told me that we will do that because this way we know that you may come back. And I love them so much, all of them. But after 2 years and having family there, in some point you have to move forward. It's hard to move backwards.
That's right. That's right. And I want to get to Stephen here, but I must say, what a charmed career. I mean, it sounds glorious. The way people love you, support you, want you back, all that good stuff. And we'll discuss why when we talk about this CD. Now, Stephen, a little
Yes.
Yes.
backstory. Your youth was spent in some. There's something about Toledo.
Larissa, just wanted to
Yeah,
conclude one
sure.
thing.
You probably wanted to know how this immigration stuff happened.
Yeah.
Of course, family was here, but I didn't come to my family, and I came as professional. So I was granted green card as musician of extraordinary abilities, which
Bingo.
for me, that is great, great honor.
Bingo.
And of course, a few years after that, I was honored to become a citizen.
Mm-hmm. Aha, wonderful. Just as I am honored to be receiving unemployment benefits for the first time as a professional unemployed musician. Remember, Stephen, I mean, that just doesn't happen. As freelance artists, we never get unemployment. So for whatever, there's an upside to everything, I suppose. And in this case, I hope we as musicians and artists of all stripes and sorts will be a little more recognize that we too need to make a living, and when times are tough, we need some help. All right. What have I forgotten? Stephen,
Yes.
where, when, and why? And I want to know about Toledo because Toledo is mentioned. By the way, everything you mentioned, I did read. But tell me, where do you originate, and how come? And was Toledo it?
Well, Holy Toledo. Well, I'm I'm originally from Long Island, New York,
Bless you.
and uh, thank you. um,
Mazel
and
tov, I should have said.
well, thank you. And after graduating from Yale, I I really didn't have too many plans. And as they say, life happens while you're making other plans. I was actually considering staying in New Haven and continuing with, furthering my degree and eventually getting a doctorate from Yale. But in the meantime, I had sent out applications for teaching positions. And it's kind of a funny thing because I had been alerted by the University of Albuquerque, New Mexico. They were wanting to bring me, but first they gave me a phone interview. That was the very first interview I had. And in between that and being called to Albuquerque from nowhere, I was notified from the University of Toledo. But in some part of my mind, it didn't click that it was Toledo. It still registered that it was Albuquerque. And so they called me and they were inviting me for a live interview, which I was expecting from the University of Albuquerque.
In
And
February, right? It was in February, right? Then you had a surprise. Go ahead, sorry.
Actually, I had just graduated from Yale. It was in May.
Oh.
And I looked into the airports of Albuquerque, and the chair from the University of Toledo gave me the name of Toledo Express or Detroit. It still didn't click. And I called him back and said, well, I booked a flight into the Albuquerque airport, which is a mile away from the university. And at that point, he realized that I was probably being offered a job somewhere else, which was it was a good ploy that I didn't even realize I was doing.
Interesting.
So I went to Toledo. At the end of my interview, they offered me the job at the end of that day, and the rest was history.
That's right. You can't turn that stuff down. No, no.
I was literally 23 years old. I was, embarking on what I thought was a solo career with attachment to a university. I was a member of the Toledo Trio. We made a recording on Musical Heritage Society of
I remember, yeah, Musical Heritage.
Trio, Horatio Parker and Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. And that's where we recorded that actually in Sprague Hall at Yale. Because one, I knew the recording engineer, but two, Charles Ives was a student at Yale and had studied composition with Horatio Parker, whose suite we were recording, who was Ives' teacher at Yale.
Nice, nice. Synchronicity, wonderful.
So the name of that album was the Toledo Trio Paints 3 New England Portraits.
Oh, that's amazing.
And we actually were nominated for a Grammy for that recording. But that was the beginning of my recording experiences with Gene Kimball, who was the engineer for our recording.
Yes.
And we're not quite there, I don't think. Let me make sure I've covered all the early stuff, but we're going to get there because this recording,
But
let me just, yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about my experiences as a student of Janos Starker, because as Larissa was mentioning, that she was continuing this amazing lineage that touched David Oistrakh's hand. And during one of my lessons with Mr. Starker, he was revealing that he had been playing Beethoven sonatas as a young child with students of Franz Liszt, because he was a student at the Franz Liszt Academy. And of course, Franz Liszt was teaching there a generation prior, of course. And Starker was a student of David Popper's last pupil, Adolf Schiffer. And so there is this incredible line. And when he mentioned that he was playing Beethoven sonatas with students of Franz Liszt, it's like you're shaking hands with history. And that these people actually knew Johannes Brahms, and they were the link between the old school, the old world, and the new and modern world.
Yeah, and now they're gone. I presume most everyone is gone. There was that link between the 19th century, the old school, as you say, and this move into the 20th century. So how lucky and fabulous to experience people who. What blows me away is just knowing people who knew nothing of electricity,
Yes.
who went to the concert hall by carriage. I mean, and then transitioned into automobiles and electricity. I mean, it's what a life, what a span for those people of that period to live through.
Yes.
What a change in the world. Speaking of changes in the world, I'm trying to get us on to topic here. Let's go back. I want to redo the programming a little bit. I think we've covered enough of just about everything, I think, except the music. So let's talk about it. We have already spoken about how this CD was recorded in Sprague Hall on the campus of Yale School of Music, and it's a beautiful late 19th century kind of wooden, yummy hall, and it is kind of vibrant, as I recall from years back, and acoustically lovely. So let's just talk. Let's go directly to the recording, because again, what I was trying to speak to when we spoke off camera is, and again, I'm a musician. I'm not an acoustic engineer or anything, but I can tell. We can tell when the sound is just exactly right there, and you can hear everything without the danger of a too lively space. In terms of, especially maybe this repertoire, I referred to the repertoire as a little bit dry, and it's not a good choice of words particularly, but do you understand kind of what I'm thinking? That 30s sort of a dryness. Did that make any sense to you at all? Probably not.
I think the acoustics felt very objective. So you don't
Mm.
special help. It's not like special ambience that comes and helps you. It was very objective. So you will get what you hear.
Superb. And then
And
about about capturing that, about your engineer who captured this direct
And I
sound.
think your description of dry, I think more aptly is that this music is so intricate and so um, multi-layered, and so it's very necessary that those textures are clear and
Yeah.
and that the transparency is prominent without the loss of beautiful resonant tone.
Exactly. You have helped me describe this. You've helped me with that description, because I knew that I wasn't referring to the music as dry, but the sound that I was hearing was beautifully clean. Uh,
And our focus on this was to create as much lyricism as possible, because even though these are works that were in many ways experimental, still the tonal beauty of our instruments was very much part of it, and we wanted to present music that would be attractive, and so I think Sprague Hall was a beautiful place to record in, because it has clarity, but it also has beautiful resonance.
Plus, we were attracted to multiple layers of textures. There's so many textures in timbre and technique and combinations of pizzicato arco and chords, double stops, different bow techniques. So that has to be very clear in order to be, to create this architectural power.
Well done. I'm going to ask you to cut a little bit more. I'm always so concerned that you might fall out of the frame when it's two people to a frame. It gets a little tight. Oh, that was great anyway. But just kind of keep that in mind, please. Let's move on to the music itself, because we're there. We've touched on it. We've gotten there. Let me get down to it. Let's start with the Ravel, which is the first piece on the program, Sonata for Violin and Cello from 1920-22. This is a completely transformed human being from the war. I think it's just a totally different. This is Ravel as we did not hear him pre World War One, and everybody needs to be reminded he drove an ambulance. He saw it all.
So you
Let's
mentioned that he was traumatized. He
ex-
was really traumatized with all those events, plus he lost mother around the same time.
yeah, that's correct.
Years before he completed the work, his mother was gone. So that also probably brought so much of different feelings.
And it's not as though, to speak to what Stephen is speaking to, it's not as though the piece is depressing or morbid or maudlin at all. It's wonderful, but it is totally different. It is Ravel as people might not have ever heard him before. What do you think, Stephen? Help me out.
I was just thinking, the third movement in particular has this tragic tone to it, and would almost have um, essence of an elegy of sorts.
I call it a lovely lamentation.
Yes, and there is such poignancy to it that it leaves one transformed, and it's actually a perfect third movement because he doesn't leave the listener with with this melancholy. Instead, he brings us right back into this free for all, frolicking last movement,
Yes.
which is literally you know, a, I almost have an image of the cartoon Tom and Jerry, where they're running around and slamming doors and poking fun and being sarcastic with each other.
There are
And
shticks and vignettes, little in a dancerly way, little stanzas, little phrases, little poses, poseurs, if you will, and so on. It's lovely and full of vigor and energy, and that intensifies the mystery to me all the more about people who are so traumatized as he was, and others. I mean, the Napoleonic Wars messed everybody up for a half a century at least, including Schubert and Beethoven and all the rest of them. And yet life is life, and there is vigor and energy, and we come back from things, as we all very well know from our recent planetary malaise. Uh,
and the fact that you're mentioning that, I find it almost an eerie connection between our present day situation with a pandemic and 100 years ago, which is close to when this was written. That 100 years ago, the world was experiencing another pandemic, which left hundreds of thousands of fatalities. And I think it's the sum total of the tragedies of the world that was imposed on Ravel's psyche. And because the older styles would never work again, he was forced to look into the future. And it was the same time as Stravinsky's experimentation with polytonalities, because the second movement in particular, we found it absolutely
Yes,
such an incredible journey to work through. We were
this bitonality,
we were we were practicing the second movement early on,
it's quite a
and
labyrinth, even. I mean,
and we
it's
were both
complex.
convinced that each of us were playing wrong notes.
because our parts are written in different keys, so it's
Mm.
completely from the beginning to the end.
Which, by the way, I have read about in the program notes, but never occurred to me as I was taking my own notes on the performance. You know why? The intonation is perfect,
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
right? I mean, exactly so. If the intonation is not perfect, you're in
The
trouble.
effect is lost. There
Absolutely.
is no effect.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So,
And there's so much of experimentation, and I think maybe that saying something new in history of duet for violin and
yeah.
cello, developing it so much. He definitely was influenced by Kodai because the premiere of his piece, his first time that he called it duo. Later on, that became sonata. So I think it was definitely connected in many
You
ways.
mentioned that, and I was thinking.
And, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
And
go ahead.
you have to say in the same breath that both Kodai and Ravel were influenced by Debussy.
Absolutely.
And so, to not talk about Debussy's influence would be missing the mark, because actually the Ravel Sonata was an homage to Debussy.
Okay,
itself.
very, very interesting. Thanks for reminding me of some of that detail. But you know what? Kodai, I hadn't made a Kodai Debussy connection until you just mentioned it. That I'll
This,
look into in
this,
my head.
this, the summer of 1905, Kodai had a very auspicious lunch meeting with Claude Debussy.
Ah, amazing.
And it is so apparent that not only the man but his music got into his psyche, because the Kodai Duo, Opus 7, and his solo sonata, Opus 8, which was written around the same time, there is so much quality of Debussy's exploratory harmonic ideas, using harmony as a color as opposed to as a function. And it's the synthesis of Debussy's new language together with the Hungarian linguistic aspects that formed Kodai's style. But then Ravel was also obviously affected by Debussy's music, and the colors, the gossamer aspect, the changes of metric, nuance, all of those things are Debussy.
Also, Debussy's common thread in this recording, because Chopin had opportunity to study with Debussy, and we kind of have this kind of connection that is underlying connection. And Stephen was mentioning this last movement of Ravel's sonata. For me, that is like so colorful tapestry, incredible bursting colors, and at the same time, there are images, so many images in an entire piece. So it's like, in some point, it's like collage. In last movement, every single images come together. So that is very interesting.
And the other part that is really fascinating is the compositional technique of tying all four movements together as an overall arch form, because what the last movement is the string summary of the first, second, and third movements that came before, and he recaps many of the material that he uses in the first three movements.
See everybody out there in Facebook land and all 27,000 of you, we're talking Yale. We're talking a Yale person here. This is a Yale conversation, I'm certain of it. It's so fascinating and so important. We're not talking entertainment, we're talking art. You know, I mean, it's important that all human beings that have any interest in the stuff we spend our lives with understand. You have to dig and explore and experience over and over again as the doors and windows open to reveal more and more secrets. I mean, that's why we're in this profession. Let's move on to Honegger. I didn't talk to you yet, Stephen, about your conducting career, but I'll throw this one out at you. The one and only piece of Honegger's I've ever conducted was King David. And I'll never forget that experience, and that piece is locked in my head. So every time I see the name Honegger, boom, everything comes into my head from King David. This is quite a different piece, his Sonatina for violin and cello from 1932. Again, everybody needs to remember we're talking world financial collapse still, recovery. We're talking rise of National Socialism in Germany. We're talking a world that's just a mess. Yes, finally maybe beginning to pull itself together, and Honegger creates this charming piece. Yeah, so go.
And now you can use Debussy as the antithesis of Honegger, because Honegger belongs to the group of composers regarded as les Six, the French Six.
Yep.
And their whole take on music was to bring music back to more solid ground. You know, Debussy left us without borders. You know, he did not use outlines. He did not use conventional harmonies and colors. And Honegger was bringing us back to some of those more physical forms that were more common and used prior to Debussy.
Interesting, wonderful. Thank you for that. That's fabulous. I hadn't really thought of Honegger in that sense. He's a tough name to pronounce.
You think of Poulenc and Honegger and Milhaud. All of them were, in a way, they were rebelling against what Debussy was trying to accomplish.
As were les Six. That's the whole thing. I'm thinking of Bouffe sur la Tour or something like that. That's bum ba-da-dum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum. I mean, very down in the saloon music. Yes. You know what I mean? Forget the artsy fartsy stuff of Debussy. Let's get down there and dance, if you will.
Unfortunately, the Six were not known for the deepest music. Sometimes they came off as kind of trite and comic. But I think Honegger established some depth in his sonatina, because some of the slower passages in the second movement, for instance, were much more philosophic than other examples.
Yeah, and this is pre. I mentioned King David. This is obviously pre King David. I think of King David as being from the 50s, before Honegger's death. I'm not quite sure where it stands. Frankly, it's been too many years. But this is really a substantive, early and very serious sonata, I think, for the two instruments. And yet it has a lot of that, as you've said, the fireworks and statement and response and all those good things, and colors and everything that's essential. But yeah, what about the Andante? How about talk to me a little about the Andante, the second movement? Who wants to grab that one? Come on, Elisha. Not this. I should have said. Sorry.
The Andante is something that is almost searching for light. I think it's probing. It makes you think about another world almost, because it's not tangible almost.
We were working a lot to find particular color in our sound and tone, and use particular style of vibrato to create special, timbre,
Yep.
and kind of to sink into this particular feeling of this music.
Didn't you describe it? I thought I didn't. Is this the movement you described something as again? It's kind of a foggy. I see it. It's a very ominous, even a rather disturbing sort of tonality in a way. It's quite.
But the middle section is this little fugue.
That fast section,
and it's not easy by any means. You could definitely, if you're not careful, get tripped up. But but that's what makes it so much fun. But the beginning and the ending is almost a chorale, and it's vocal in its color, I think, and I like that idea, because when you think of string instruments, we are always teaching our students to literally sing on the instrument. That it's a vocal like instrument. It's
and
not,
we have to imitate the voice.
and so it's very haunting, and just like some choral work with small, not many voices in a cathedral, this kind of ballooning out and then coming back. It has certain qualities like that.
And I'm looking at my own notes. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned about how tricky it is, because it's been on my mind since Honegger first popped into my head when I saw the CD, and my own experience with King David. It's tricky. King David is tricky, so I had been meaning to ask you: is Honegger tricky? You know what I mean? He's tricky?
Yes, it is.
Intonation has to be perfect. Also, again, I think what stuns me the most is your perfect intonation and such clean, beautifully matched articulation between both of you play. I mean, it's just such a beautiful melding of sound of the two sounds. But intonation, of course, you're professionals, so I mean, I hope I'm not beating a dead horse here. Of course, you're going to play with perfect intonation, and it's required in this CD. It has to be perfect, and the slightest problem, and I would have heard it. I'm sure. You see what I mean? It's so delicate and so dangerous, even. So kudos to both of you. You are, in fact, a duo.
Thank you.
I don't know how many years, first thing in the morning and over dinner you've been working together, but as an ensemble of two, it's just perfection. So anyway, what else more about Honegger? Such an interesting fellow. I'm looking at this last movement, this Allegro, my notes here a little bit. Kind of gypsies and strumming cello and all a kind of dance motif. I mean, he's not an unpleasant fellow. Sorry, it's my clock going off. A kind of travelogue in a way, that last movement. As you said, there are all these little episodes and little fun games. Very French somehow to me.
There is elegance and joyfulness and game and all together, but it's also very virtuosic.
And like Larissa mentioned earlier, it's a character display, and I almost have an image of someone walking down the street with a beret, and they don't have a worry in their head, and it's a carefree type of thing, and almost whistling. dum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. I'm a very happy guy. Ooh,
I
we.
think I think I used the word skipping in here in my notes. I mean, it really is just skipping down the street.
But then between the two cadenzas, first the violin cadenza and then the cello cadenza, that is a real tour de force of compositional writing, and it's a real task for the instrumentalist because it's something that is you're not expecting it. It comes out of nowhere, and it leaves you with your jaw open, basically.
There you go. That's Honegger for you. Just period. In that comes out of from unexpected places. I mean, I just can remember something about putting the chorus together, and the lines looked so easy and straightforward, and they were so hard to get to work in terms of intonation and balance and all. Tricky, coming at you from out of nowhere. I guess is what I'm wandering on about. Look, we're going to have to wind this down, or people are going to go off and have dinner without us. Schulhoff. Let's talk about this duo for violin and cello from 1925. Um, it's just again murdered in a concentration camp in 1942. He and his son, I think, both were murdered. So a horror of the loss to the planet of so many. But this piece is so perfect, such a perfect choice because it is. He has had some experience, World War I and his own life, I presume, the life of any Jew, in Europe in the 20s and teens. But this is a piece that's the wonder of it, the fiddler on the roof, if you will, the joy of music and making music and composing music. Give me an overview before I lose myself in this one. It's a very important work.
Schulhoff's tragedy uh, is in some way offset by the fact that over the last, I'd say, 15, 20 years, his music has become more and more known, and that's a good thing. And his output is really surprising. He wrote a lot of chamber music, and he did think in terms of the miniature ensemble. He was not thinking in large pieces by any means. The duo is obviously another throwback to the Kodai duo. The fact that he's calling it a duo, the fact that how he treats the two voices and the equality of material between the two voices, and the imaginative way in which he mixes arco and pizzicato together. The second movement, Zingaresca, for instance, is an example of that, which is whenever Larissa plays it, it's something that I'm always wondering, how is she doing that?
This is kind of exactly the point of this CD. Thank you for so modestly bringing it up, but it's true. I mean, absolutely brilliant playing from both of you. It's superb playing. I mean, throughout the entire CD. But the Schulhoff again, it always puzzles me. I don't know, something about a collective prescience about what might come or what has been, and yet still, as you said, the Zingaresca, the joy of life, the gypsy spirit in the music. A brilliant piece. How often is this piece performed? I'm just trying to think if I've ever encountered it.
None of these pieces are actually that much, for obvious reasons, because they're not easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there you go. Touche. And it's so true. But let me tell you. Okay, let's see. Anything else? I'm looking at the moderato, for example, and just kind of reading through my little notes here. There's this. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes the conversation is difficult between the two of you. Sometimes it's anguished. Sometimes just this statement and response, to put a more simple note on it, but beautifully put together by Schulhoff in terms of a conversation between these two colors, fiddle and cello, and also just again, as I've said probably ad nauseum, but the way the two of you blend, and I use that word a lot in my notes here, the blend is so perfect. The blend of your colors, the two of you together is hard. It's very, very hard. So
thanks so much.
Phew, okay.
When you mentioned Schulhoff has in his sound a melancholy, and I sometimes think of Gustav Mahler in the same way, because in Mahler's music, even in the joyful moments, there is a melancholy, and there's a sadness, and there's kind of this underlying darkness that never seems to leave the music. And I'm sure we could say that about all three of these works, that the tragedy of the time and era and the forebodingness of how the world will be. It's hard not to think, that this was an escape in some way from the realities of life, but at the same time, music is always a reflection of how life is.
Yeah, but those works are brilliant and they're not depressing in any way.
No, that's the miracle, really, the miracle. But I think the point is well taken, and again, kind of as a history lover, I mean, the 19th century was horrible for Jews in Europe. Horrible, the pogroms, the massacre, so many things we know nothing about even. So I think indeed there is this kind of cultural weight that is perfectly understandable and justifiable with Schulhoff in particular, and the other two have also experienced the hell, the displacement of the First World War, and in many ways are anticipating because it didn't get better.
No.
It didn't get better. I mean, we stopped killing for a while, but then we plunged into a whole worldwide depression and all the rest of it. So, fascinating CD, fascinating repertoire, and I want to reemphasize because since you can't help but discuss the period, the history around this, the symbolism, the sub basement of this particular music on this CD, and yet it's glorious. I mean, the Ravel is fabulous and full of energy and beautifully played, beautifully recorded, superb, the level of recording. The Honegger is wonderful and cheerful, and there are these moments that allow us to understand that things might not have been altogether happy gypsy dance times. What have I forgotten to ask?
I don't know. You wanted to know something about the conductor.
Yeah, why not? Well, let's do that. Just a quick one, and then I'll do a little review of the CD. But what got that started?
It's just a second love of mine. I began conducting as a student of my dad, who was a conducting student of Pierre Monteux and Leon Barzan.
Drop a name or two.
And it's more of a continuation of what I do on the channel.
And when did you begin?
Conducting?
That's right.
Well, I began studying conducting when I was a little boy. My dad was bringing me through a lot of scores. So I'd say I started studying conducting probably around 11.
Oh, you rat fink. I started conducting when I was 15, and I thought I was a whiz kid. So anyway, just kidding. I started the Santa Barbara Youth Symphony here when I was a kid, and by some miracle, the adults, uh, you know, succored me. They taught me, they took me aside, they showed me how to do this and that and the other thing. It was wonderful instead of just slapping me around. But that's why I want to ask, because there's an intoxication to it. There's a tremendous responsibility to conducting.
Yes.
And it is the way to whatever, the golden sunset or something. I don't know. It's
Well, for me, it's very humbling, and it's very awe-inspiring because looking at a score with conductor's eyes is different than looking at a score as just a soloist. So if I'm studying and preparing a concerto, I'm thinking of the entire work as a conductor, not as a soloist.
And by the way, one conductor to another. I am convinced that because of the way we have been made to study scores, in other words, we see 24 lines moving simultaneously and pay attention to every single one of them all at once at the same time, I'm convinced that's how come I see peripherally much better than most people do. I see 101 things all the time going on, and most people just see, two or three rays. Yeah.
Yeah, that may be just your individual talent.
Oh, too kind. All right, and we better stop this before it gets too mushy. I've just had a wonderful, fabulous first video interview since in at least 2 or 3 months since the terrible shutdown and sequestering of the entire planet for COVID-19. I think it's appropriate to mention because we are in historic times, and we might as well put a little aside, a little asterisk that sure enough we've had a wonderful conversation. Life goes on. We will come out of this. I'm speaking with violinist Larissa Elisha. Did I do it? Thank you. And don't ask me why, but when I get hung up, I get hung up. And cellist Stephen Elisha, known to the world as Duo Virtuoso. We talked about their.
That's the name of our album, and our duo name is Elaris Duo.
Okay, you just. Oh, there you are down there, about 2 paragraphs down. Okay, so sorry. Let's clarify. Duo Virtuoso II is the CD we were just discussing, and the ensemble, these two are known as the Elaris Duo. Okay. And what a CD. I've mentioned this. Superb, really a superb choice of repertoire. Honegger, Sonatina for violin and cello. Ravel, Sonata for violin and cello, and Erwin Schulhoff's Duo for violin and cello. 3 works from the tween years between the 2 world holocausts, and yet cheerful, positive, dancerly, if you will, all that good thing about the human condition, which is we all recover, we all move on. It's jolly good. We're humans, even though we might be able to destroy the planet. Still, I think somehow we'll manage not to. Stephen,
the musicians, I think, will be okay.
There you go. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for giving me some time tonight, and thanks. Are we done?
It's been absolutely delightful discussing everything with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.